So how did you get involved in Breast Cancer Awareness Month?
Well, unfortunately, I had a positive biopsy back in February, and much to my surprise, doing a routine mammogram, found that I had a stage 1 breast cancer and immediately scheduled surgery and was able to slide in and get my surgery, which ended up being a mastectomy. Ended up getting that done just before the COVID-19 crisis, and basically spent the pandemic recuperating.
Mm.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you didn't feel it yourself. You just happened to go in for a checkup.
Well, I'll give you a little backstory. About 15 years ago, right after my son was born, I had a benign growth removed. It was very tiny, but it was the kind of tissue that they say 1 in 4 turn to cancer. So when they removed it, they biopsied it. There was no cancer, but they told me to just, keep an extra eye on my girls. So every year I was pretty faithful to do mammogram plus ultrasound. I really want to say that because both of those lumps were detected by ultrasound, not by the mammogram. And I went in for this physical, and I was actually just doing like my yearly, I call it rooter to tutor, head to toe, check the boobies, check the ovaries, everything else, the bone density. And the first appointment that came up was the mammogram. So I said, okay, let's go, let's do it. And I reminded them that I needed an ultrasound because I had a history. And so it's important to be your own advocate because nobody else seemed to remember that I was supposed to have an ultrasound but me. And I will tell you that they would not have found it without the ultrasound. So I'm very thankful to be alive. I did elect to do a double mastectomy because I didn't want to be chasing the other side because the type of cancer I had is estrogen dependent. And so after much thought and prayer, I decided to do both with immediate reconstruction. And thankfully, there was no cancer in my lymph node. So I did not have to do chemo. I did not have to do radiation. We just took everything out, rebuilt it from the inside, and now I say I'm the bionic booby woman.
That you can smile and laugh because I think to hear cancer is one of the scariest things. And many of us who are listening right now probably run from even going to the doctor because we don't want to hear that. We don't want to hear those words,
Well,
you have
yeah.
cancer. How did you get through the first initial, walk us through when they said it came back, it is malignant.
If I can tell you the truth, Karen, I have a strong relationship with God. And when I laid on that table while they were poking me with a needle, I had a feeling. I just did. I just had a feeling like, Rebecca, if this comes back, just be very radical and very decisive. Don't play around. And when I got my results less than a week later, I just had this eerie kind of calm because I already knew what to do. And I tell people all the time, listen to your inner voice, whatever you conceive that to be, because even the urgency I felt about checking myself was very strong. It was a very strong, go do your physicals, just that insistent kind of knocking on the door of my heart. And I believe God saved my life because we caught it early.
Stage 1 is
very early. Yeah. And, and I didn't want to chase the other side for the next 10 years. Oh, check the other one. So I just did what I felt I had to do. And I don't advocate that that's everybody's, choice, but that was mine. And I can't say I wasn't afraid. I certainly had some fear, but I also had faith. I had faith that I would come through it.
Your story is so reminiscent of stories I'm hearing more and more frequently from within my own peer group, right? As you reach the end of your 30s and you sort of cross into the 40 land, you're like, oh, these things don't work the way they used to, or wow, so-and-so is experiencing this and I'm being recommended by my doctor to do things for the very first time. And what I'm struck by is the fact that, or one of the things I'm struck by is that you said that the cancer that you had, but for the ultrasound test, would not have been caught just by the mammogram. Now, let's say you hadn't had that experience previously, which put you on alert and let you know that you needed the ultrasound. At what stage was the type of cancer that you had? When do they think, or when is that type of cancer most typically seen in a mammogram? Because now I'm wondering, should women of my age be asking, in addition to the mammogram, should I also be getting ultrasound, even if I haven't had any previous history?
You know, I really love ultrasound. I've had 5 babies, and I've had plenty of ovary issues and all kinds of issues. And all I can tell you is that even the first lump, this is the story of the first lump they found. I was doing a breast check, and I felt this little lump under my arm. And went to my doctor and said, I feel a lump under my arm. He made a few phone calls and got me rushed right into the breast center. They did mammogram, didn't see anything. Did the ultrasound, still didn't see anything. They ran the ultrasound over the lump in my armpit area, and they said, oh, that's just your lymph node. That's nothing. And then while the doctor and the technician were chatting, like blah, 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 the girl says, holy shit. And I said, what? She says, there's no way you felt this. She says, there's like a little pea-sized lump. It's all the way down by your chest wall. There's no way you felt this, Rebecca.
Wow.
And she said, if you want a biopsy, we will. But the doctor, male doctor, oh, do you drink a lot of soy milk? Oh, it's probably just a calcium deposit. Oh. And then again, this is where you have to listen to God. Everything in my spirit said, be safe and sorry. Be safe and sorry. Make them do a biopsy. So I stayed at the breast center all day so they could squeeze me in and do the biopsy. And they called me 2 days later. They said, you need to take this out. They said it's called a radial scar, and 1 in 4 turn to cancer. You need to get it out.
Wow.
So I went, had the surgery. They sliced it to death and said, no cancer found, but these little things, they turn to cancer. Keep checking. So 15 years later, I have this small stage 1. And let me say this. I mentioned that I did the other side as a precaution. Well, guess what? My pathology report came back that my left side was full of radial scars.
Wow.
No cancer, but radial scars all throughout the milk duct. And I said, thank you, Jesus. Lefty got spared. So now I have 2 slightly imperfect boobies, but I don't look bad in a tank top.
Listen, none of our boobies are perfect. They're all asymmetrical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there's that. And I'm just floored by just your positive attitude, but I do understand, what you stand on. I understand it immensely. And we talk often about the ancestors on this show, and listening to them. A lot of times we don't plug in to what the ancestors are saying, but they always are talking to us when we're open to listening. And so, some people.
Yes. And, my mother, bless her heart, my mother's 78. We have no cancer history in our family. But just a year before my diagnosis, she had a stage 2 breast cancer and also opted to do a mastectomy because she didn't want to go through radiation or chemo. And her result was the same as mine. Nothing in the lymph node, nothing to, treat on down the road systemically. But no history. No history in the family. And so even I took the genetic testing and I did not have the gene. So, this tells me that so much of this increase in cancer, younger ages, it's environmental. It's what we're breathing and eating and drinking and being exposed to. And we have a lot to learn. We just really need to understand how we're doing this to ourselves.
We're talking with Rebecca Cruz. It is National Breast Cancer Awareness Month, and you can follow her at Rebecca Crews, Crews on the Twitters, and designercruise.sale.com. Yeah, she has a business. We're going to talk about that as well. Your husband is a physical specimen, so I imagine that you guys eat well in your home. Was there something
We do for the most part.
Okay. Was there something that you have now eliminated from your diet?
I wish I could say that I've eliminated all the bad stuff, but I'm yet sitting here sucking on something that is my evil poison. But I can thankfully say I don't drink a lot of it anymore. I just sip and toss the rest.
What is that?
Are there things are Coca-Cola?
What are you sipping on?
Coca-Cola.
Oh, wow.
But I want to say this. I do juice and eat a lot of vegetables and eat a lot of fruits and do all those things. I wish I could say that I have a perfectly clean diet. I would say my diet is 90% clean. Every once in a while, I want a piece of pie and I eat it. So maybe I'm not the best example.
What about meat? Are you guys doing meat?
I am eating less meat. I eat meat, maybe I'll go several days without meat, and then I'll have it. And if I do have meat, I'll have it only once a day. And I'm doing fish. But no, I have not cut out beef. And we eat all organic and grain-fed and all that. And that we've been doing for years, to be honest, eating in terms of clean.
You know, I've had a doctor on just about every Wednesday on this show for the last 6 years, and they all tell me when they go to medical school, learning about nutrition is like it's like not even 1% of their medical training. And you talk about environment, food is the other thing. And especially as Black people, we are raised on pork and meat with every meal, bacon for breakfast and eggs, and the hormones that they put in meat, even if it's grass-fed, they're still not natural. You know, it's still, we should not be eating this much meat. That's not natural to who we are. And I think that culturally, we need to start to really do that drumbeat, because this is not our natural diet in this country. We don't come from a diet of people that eat meat all the time. You know, we're not Vikings or, you know, anyway.
Right. Well, and I'm convinced, Karen, that it's what we have done to food. I don't believe things came from the ground and from the earth that are, you know, I believe it's what we've done to process the food and how we've tried to capitalize and make money. You know, I'm convinced in my heart that all the estrogen-related cancers and the breast cancers and the ovarian, that has to do with the hormones and the steroids that they put in the cows with the milk, and, you know, for the meat. And I think that the rise in these diseases is co-equivalent to our modernity and the ways in which we've tried to rush the process of producing food. And because we didn't see this number of diseases 30, 40, 50 years ago, we didn't see cancer rates this high. And it's because we were eating both our meats and our vegetables fresh from the farm, without all the processing, without all the hype, without all the fattening them up and forcing them to produce milk when they're not pregnant. And, you know, I remember reading a story about a woman who consistently had tumors in her ovaries, and a Black woman. And this doctor, white doctor, asked her, "Do you eat a lot of chicken wings?" She said, "Yeah, I eat chicken wings once a week." He said, "You should stop eating chicken wings, because right in the wing is where they inject the hormones and the steroids into the chicken to go into the breast, to make the breast bigger, right?"
Wow.
So when you eat the wing, you're eating the injection site with the most concentration of the bovine hormones. And this woman was like, she'd get the tumors cut out and there'd be more. And so she spread the word on a blog that I read about wings. And this, I mean, she said this was the first time she ever heard anything like that from a doctor.
taking care of yourself and thinking about the food options and the environmental options, it can sometimes seem like so much you don't quite know where to start. And maybe I'm talking to myself, so, this could be a purely personal
I agree.
But for women who are, you're living your 20s, you're loud and proud and life is great. In your 30s, you're like, oh, I'm a woman, hear me roar. When it comes to our physical health and just being responsive to the changes that we go through as we mature, what advice would you give to young Black women as it pertains to mammograms, as it pertains to having to advocate for yourself for an ultrasound if you think there may be a reason for it? What advice do you think we should have and should take with us when we go into these medical rooms? When the doctor, we are often trusting to know more than we do about any particular subject, even though we know our bodies better than anyone else.
Well, I can tell you this. In my 20s, I was dumb as a rock. And I don't know that I would have known to ask certain questions. Right. But I did love to read. And if there's anything I would say to young women, we have the internet, we have knowledge out here. I would read everything you can about these issues on your own. Because I've even had conversations with doctors about articles I read that they've never read. And, I'm not saying they're not good at their job, but, sometimes people get into their profession and they're not staying up on what's current. They're not constantly educating themselves. Or if they are, they're only using one source or a certain medium to educate themselves. And it has its own biases, Yeah. I shudder to think what would have happened if I hadn't put my foot down about getting an ultrasound that day. I had to remind both my doctor and my technician. I said, well, you need to call him back or do whatever. And they found it. And it was sitting on like the wrong pile of paper or stuck in the fax machine, human error. And if I hadn't said anything, I would have went home. Oh, la-di-da, everything's fine. And a year later, that would have been stage 3.
Oh, God.
Or who knows what. I mean, you understand?
Yeah.
So,
I mean, if Serena Williams had to advocate for herself, a woman that suffers from blood clots, and tell the doctor, I know that I have a blood, like you are going to have to look for this blood clot. They were going to send her home too, to her death. So if these stories do not force us into action, we have dominion over our own bodies. We can demand people to treat us with respect, no matter what their background is. And you're living proof. Thank God, living proof that when you advocate for yourself, you can get the kind of treatment that you deserve. And it's not just because you're rich, it's because you demanded it.
Absolutely. And I want to say this too, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I wanted to say this as well, that it's important as women to not be worried about being nice, to not be worried about being polite. We're socialized to be nice. And I've often said, pardon my language, why do I have to be a bitch to get what I want? Because sometimes you just have to be the one that's annoying. I mean, even with my surgery, I pestered my surgeon and the plastic surgeon because before my diagnosis, my son got cast on a TV show, which I'll tell you about, but I knew I was going to have to be driving him to work every day. So I said, look, we need to get this surgery, get it popping, let's move, because my son starts work in March. And I harassed them until they got me a date. And I think if I had not harassed them, I would have went through that pandemic waiting to have surgery. And literally 2 weeks after my surgery, the whole country was shut down.
The squeaky wheel gets the oil.
For me personally, it made me sit up and say, don't take any day for granted. Don't live like you have tomorrow to do what you're called to do. Don't put off the dreams, the visions, the impulses that are in your heart. Because I have a strong faith, I said to myself, if I'm going to leave the planet, I'm at peace with leaving the planet. But what I didn't want to do was leave the planet, and I had not done what I was put here to do. And so for me, it gave me great urgency, so that when you have the urge to call that friend you haven't talked to in 20 years, do it now. You know, when you have an idea that you're sitting on because you're afraid, just frickin' do it. Because I knew, you know, before they came back with stage 1 or stage whatever, you know, your mind imagines the worst. And so I went straight to, oh my God, I'm going to die, you know. And, you know, my mother-in-law passed away from complications of cancer. She had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and though her blood count was in the normal ranges, she got a secondary infection from all the treatment, which, you know, reduced her immune system, and she died of the infection. She died of an infection being treated for cancer, Black woman. And the sad story about all of that is that it's rumored that there was some neglect there, because upon admittance, they did some blood work and then just left her sleeping in a room for days on end. And it took them a period of time to go back. And apparently a Black nurse looked at her chart and said, why is this woman just laying here sleeping and nobody knows what's going on with her? And then they found out she was Terry Cruz's mother. And suddenly we're airlifting her to the better hospital and blah, blah, blah. And by then the infection was spread through her body and into her brain. I mean, and in my opinion, this is just my opinion, you know, she was being treated in Flint, Michigan during the water crisis. And who knows whether she was getting the best care? Who knows whether she was actually being given the best drugs or the best treatment? We don't even know. So
we do know that a government was willing to redirect water and poison the water source for a whole lot of people that now have to contend with the fallout from that. So we do know that Flint has that.
Well, but the horror of the whole thing was that, you know, as lay people who don't have a medical knowledge, just like you said, you trust the doctor. You walk in there thinking that they know, and you put your life in their hands like a child. And I'm not going to say there was one person I could point the finger at, but I just can't help but feel that had she been a white female with the same kind of insurance, because she had amazing insurance, would we have buried her? I don't think we would have.
No. And for everyone who says there's no systemic racism, talk to this family. Shame on you too.
Yeah.